Greetings, everyone. Welcome to The Body Keeps the Score book study.
Stating
Brain, Mind, and Body and the Healing of Trauma by Bessel and Kolk, MD. Would anyone like to get us started on sharing comments, any notes?
Yeah, I don't mind starting. So the first, I'm just gonna go in order of like the chapter. So earlier in the pages, there was a mention of like what erratic parenting and regular parenting would do for offspring. And I think that's something that's very, very easy to observe. I feel like anyone in this shop can observe a friend or a family member who was a victim of erratic parenting. And if you investigate the trajectory of your life, is it a life that's constructive, or are they doing things for themselves, and are they attempting to produce justice, or are they stuck, or are they stuck in a cycle of suffering? And most of the time, it's the latter. And also the continuous effects of incest abuse, how that could lead to obesity. I feel like I know some people in my neighborhood who were definitely victims of incest abuse, and the association with obesity answers a lot of questions, because I think all of the offspring in this family structure suffer from obesity, and I suspect that there may have been some incest abuse going on, or are they all, or it's happening now because many of them do become child parents. You know, Dr. Francis Creswell's moment. But unless someone else speak for now.
Yes, huge importance. Thanks for mentioning the parenting, how really incorrect parenting can lead to just really destructive, non-constructive people. Poor, like if you have a victim parent, or just a white parent who cannot be patient with you, who cannot give you so-called love, you will grow up to be, well, at first you will become a disruptive and aggressive person, child, and then that's no way for a person to be constructive if we are disruptive and aggressive and unable to think and focus and make correct decisions that will allow us to produce justice and receive constructive results. If you have parents who are basically caregiver abusers, then that's not really gonna work out for you. And I think just how the author mentions like a bunch of like stuff that could be affecting that affects how a child grows into a so-called adult. But the most important aspect of child rearing is the relationship between the caregiver and the child. That is the most single important factor when determining like what kind of person the child is going to grow into. So on a small scale, we have victim parents and attempted caregivers who do not understand the system. So they try to child rear in really incorrect ways. And we have on a greater scale the global system of racial and white supremacy, which is the abusive caregiver of everyone non-white. So that can also like explain why the large majority of non-white people are like they clamor for attention. The author mentions like another aspect of like childhood neglect and the poor caregivers. They will like so quote clamor for attention, you know, and look on social media, look anywhere, you can always see non-white people, particularly Black people, like just trying to get people to look at them, laugh at them, or just give them any sort of attention. And it also mentions that people who are neglected and grow up within poor, well, non-constructive, destructive homes, they also well, what is it? Oh, yeah, they have they hate challenge. Like they don't want to be challenged when they face like a hurdle or something. It's very often for them to give up and not face the challenge. And also they are non-adventurous, which it can say a lot about. Well, we could use these descriptions to observe like non-white behavior, and many people who are non-white really are I would say non-adventurous, meaning that they don't want to try new things. They don't want to try to produce justice, and maybe that's because that's too great of a challenge to attempt to get serious about serious things, because that's the training and that's how abused we have been. We have been really abused to a degree where we can't face the challenge of racism and white supremacy um, because we don't have the attention span to do it, nor do we have the willpower, because white supremacy is it's just a powerful force that retards us so greatly. I have more to say on this topic, but I'll see if anyone else has comments.
I wanted to mention one more thing about the effects of erratic parenting. They often has a this also could apply to victims of racism, white supremacy, because constantly under attack means constantly being traumatized on a regular basis. But being unable to make friends and have meaningful relationships, like relationships that are productive and mean something, like you are, this relationship exists for us to both benefit from it, versus it being like a relationship where it's dependent on, or we hang out and we do drugs together, or we hang out and we just gossip or talk smack about things that we see on social media. And I've been a victim of that myself, where I was constantly, I didn't have friends. I just had associates who came over to my place to consume things with me. And reading this in the text is really interesting. And also when it's hard for people like that and victims of this such a trauma to receive help. You think the people who are trying to help you are out to get you. And yeah, it's very interesting. And Silent Warrior.
Thank you. I'll read some statement here that it says, children who develop in the context of ongoing danger, maltreatment, and disrupted caregiving systems. That sounds like a generic description of conditions of racism, white supremacy, are being ill-served by the current diagnostic systems that lead to an emphasis on behavioral control. That's like spanking and large amounts of policing, with no recognition of interpersonal trauma. No recognition of interpersonal trauma. So it seems as if what he's describing here, it's like the system of racism, white supremacy. If it wasn't about practicing racism, white supremacy, the way that the Uruguay is set up is that it is flawed anyway. They have the focus on the rational, they de-emphasize the emotional, and then so when you have failure to have proper caregiving systems in a family unit, I mean, there are most qualified diagnostic systems, psychological and support systems do not function. They're unable to properly address it. And I see, like, you might say, okay, but we have this book. This book is addressing it, but it's not widely accepted. I would suspect that, as he keeps referring, that the approach that he's putting forward is not widely accepted in his field. And I think that has to do with the European mindset, where it values one type of thinking and devalues another. Interestingly, he is not able to see, he doesn't seem to be able to, like, step back and look at the system from outside and see that he's existing in a academic tradition in general, like the whole metaphysical tradition in general is to downplay the emotional and focus on the rational. Another thing I noticed is one thing that gave me hope is that, this key issue was the nature of the parent-child relationship, how parents felt about and interacted with their kids. Mother's personality, not that important. Neurological anomalies at birth, not that important. Not IQ, not temperament, not even activity level or reactivity to stress. But that bond between caregiver and child is key, and that gives me hope that that can be communicated to victims of racism. Like, you don't have to be super smart, you don't have to have the best money, you don't have to be able to provide everything financially, but if you have that connection between yourself and that child. I'm reminded by Dr. Ben Carson's life story, Gifted Hands, where his mother couldn't read, was working multiple jobs as domestic, and his father had left the family. And yet she would not give up on her children. She kept trying to figure out, it was clear to them, even though they were poor, that their mother would not give up on them. And she had it so rough that she even checked herself into a mental hospital at times when it became too tough for her. I met Dr. Carson and his mother, and she really just looks like any grandmother in Jamaica. Really normal looking. But the thing that she couldn't read, but she got her children to stop watching TV and to read 2 books a day, two books a week, and to write little book reports, and then they would give it to her, and then she would sign on it and pretend that she was reading it. For years, he didn't know his mother couldn't read, but his mother found a way to get him to keep reading until he began to have, like, increased competence in school. So that's that mother. That's that parent-child relationship, how they felt about and interacted with the child. I mean, you in that book, Gifted Hands, you see him saying how his mother would not give up on him. I think that's the most important thing that I got from his story. And he had a problem with his anger. And as I can see now, it's part of not having his father there and being in a stressed environment. He says here that the most important predictor of how well his subjects coped with life's inevitable disappointments was the level of security established with the primary caregiver during the first 2 years of life. Well, I think that's probably true, but I suspect that even if the first 2 years of life are pretty good, if things fall apart in the family after as the child grows older, that can be harmful. I have some more notes, but I'll stop for now and let someone else talk.
Thanks for sharing. Yeah, I wrote down that was one really important aspect that reminded me of my victim mother, was that just if no matter where you are, if you're able to do like few necessary things, you and your offspring will be able to withstand a lot, because the author mentions that resilience is a trait that develops in people who have caretakers, parents who are able to provide them with a sense of security, and also are able to communicate to their baby that they're lovable babies, and that instills a sense of security, a sense of resilience in the offspring. Because I grew up in South Central Los Angeles, a really, really popular concentration camp. And I always thought of myself and the people from my hood to be resilient people. And I will even use that terminology. And once I got to so-called college, but then I understand that, oh no, this is just a really rare instance, and a lot of Black males and Black females really, really are not on the same mentality that I particularly am or was on. But that resilience is very, very true, because I'm living example of that. I think yeah, I have one more comment. I think the just the neglect and the incorrect parenting causes the majority of that's like the one of the main ways this system is maintained, because the offsprings who become aggressive and disruptive, they start the habit of being victimized by the system. Like they will get in trouble in schools consistently, and then this is basically their little that's how the school to prison pipeline functions. We have a bunch of victimized parents victimizing and poorly parenting their offspring, and then they go into the classrooms and like perpetuates a cycle of just this disruption, destruction. And it's so this book is allowing me to understand just how important these so-called family relationships are with the caretakers. And racist man have racist man, racist woman a long time ago have destroyed any sense of or any reality of us actually being a real family. This is why we must attempt to be a counter-racist family that understands the problem and has the will to produce the ability to solve the problem. This is really, really tragic and incorrect situation to be on in planet Earth. Chris, did you have something to share?
Yes, as far as parenting, it makes the relationship with the child more complicated just for how the system is set up, because now, you know, you have to provide for the child, work for the child. You have to make sure whoever you leave the child with, you know, can properly take care of your child needs and wants. And when a child lacks the attention that it needs from a parent, it starts to, the child starts to have a different reaction of how they handle things. So either way it goes, you are trying to parent the best way you can. Sometimes the attention that your child needs, you may not be able to give enough of it due to how the system has everything functioning. As far as like, you gotta go to work all the time. You gotta leave your child at these schools. You gotta make sure who you leave them with is, you know, able to understand them, take care of them, or, not neglect them or harm them, because 90% of children that do get molested, it's from a family member. So it causes you to be in a situation where you are going to bring a child in this world. You can never really prepare for it, but you have to be in a space where you can give as much as your time and a good space and environment for them to be in to grow. Because either way it goes, as a parent, you deal with your own trauma, but your trauma that you don't deal with and you suppress ends up showing in your parenting skills, and it reflects on your child.
Thanks for sharing. Very, very important to understand how much the child will mimic the messages and codes it's getting from its parents consciously and or subconsciously. If it's getting messages that you ain't worth a damn and you are a burden on me, then perhaps that child will develop behaviors and behaviors and thought patterns that tell him or her that you really aren't worth anything. So the jail, the gang life, and just a non-constructive lifestyle is what you should be doing, and hence the cycle is continued. I think the DSM-5, the really good example of how the racist man and racist woman have used like paper writing books as power and control. They read the American Psychology Association in order for them to update or add developmental trauma to like their list of traumas, but it refuses to the American Psychology Association refused to meet their request because they called it a diagnostic niche. And then the author goes to say that 1 million people are a niche, and that is an indication to me that the DSM-5 is nothing more than like a tool that they use for control. They're able to like control large majority of society with their texts. And psychology is a really powerful field. It really tells people like what's sane and how they can behave. They can turn previously thought insane behaviors into normal behaviors. So they don't want to use the DSM-5 to actually solve and help people. They use it to earn money. And the author describes it as very kind of like a medieval text, like something that the way it doesn't really address the underlying problems. It just tries to put a band-aid over like gashing wounds in the field of psychology. Kweku?
Yeah, so I wanted to comment on the parenting as well as the DSM-5. So with the erratic, first of all, can I be heard? Am I heard well?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. So with the erratic parenting, this is something that is very evident that I, personally seen being in the schools as a substitute teacher, even with children close to me in my life. You can very much tell when a child doesn't have I kind of contribute erratic parenting down to like not having kind of like structure in place for the child to be constructive or to thrive. So a lot of times these children who are are victims of erratic parenting or don't have any structure, they almost exhibit, symptoms of ADHD or ADD, not being able to like focus for too long on anything, being all over the place, not really listening, stuff like that. And and to understand that that comes from erratic parenting and not really from a, you know, a deficiency, I think is a very important, is very important to understand. And then, you know, you talk about the DSM-5 and, you know, the whole, I think he said a smorgasbord or something like that of diagnoses, you know, 300 different diagnoses now. He mentioned, you know, that, and then also that a mislabeled patient equals a mistreated patient. So now you have, you know, children victims of these erratic parenting, being misdiagnosed and being put on a bunch of drugs such as Ritalin, et cetera, you know, which just goes on to playing into the hands of the racist woman, racist man, sending those children down the school to prison pipeline because they can't focus, they can't listen, through no fault of their own. I thought it was a very important too how he mentioned the mental problems arise from not being able to get on the same wavelength as other individuals, so like the people around them. He also mentioned that humans are designed to collaborate. Well, two things on that. You know, the mental problems arising from not being able to get on the same wavelength. You know, if you as a child are unable to, you know, sit down for a couple of seconds, think, if you're unable to do those things, you're unable to collaborate with people, you're unable to listen to others. And it just kind of, you know, you start becoming shunned, you start becoming, I guess, for lack of a better word, on the out group, start being subject to bullying and all kinds of things. And this is where the mental problems start to arise. And then when, you know, being that humans are designed to collaborate, as he mentioned, I agree with that to some extent. I think humans definitely are social creatures, evident, like, you know, when people are held in solitary confinement, you know, being, you know, being excluded from kind of being around other people, they tend to start going crazy. And I think that's like evidence that humans from time to time need to socialize with other people in order to be constructive and be healthy. So when you're denied that opportunity to collaborate or to socialize with other people, you start to develop, you know, severe mental problems. And it just kind of keeps showing like where this erratic parenting can lead a child to, where the kind of path that they start going down. That's kind of what I wanted to comment on for that. And then just, he did mention, you know, something that, you know, it becomes more apparent to me every day that, you know, America, just the concept of America, or, you know, the racist powers that be, you know, he mentioned Europe spends a fraction of the cost. I think the number was $84 billion America spends on prisons, $44,000 a year per prisoner. That's the kind of money that America spends on its prisons, whereas Europe pays a fraction of the cost, and they pay more on helping parents raise their kids. For one, I think that that's because in Europe, you know, there's a lot of white people there. So that I'm sure that they get a better turnout, they get a better investment on that. Whereas, because, you know, you're not trying to mistreat large numbers of white people. Whereas here, you know, I think America is known for a very long time that their numbers are dwindling. That majority of the population is going to resemble non-whites, so they are, you know, taking the necessary efforts to make the population as unconstructive as possible, as retarded as possible. So that's why there's so much money being spent on prisons, and not enough money is being spent on helping parents raise their kids, you know, preventing these erratic parenting, like lifestyles, I guess you could say. Just like Carice mentioned, you know, how can you have a constructive parenting model in place when you don't have the necessary support? You know, non-white people can barely support themselves, but, you know, when you're unable to support a child constructively, give them some kind of stability, you know, the only thing that will happen will be erratic parenting. So that's it for me.
Very well said, Mr. Silent Warrior.
Yeah, I wanted to comment on, I also wanted to comment on Europe. And they mentioned Norway and the jails here and so on. And Norway has like a very large, over 90% white population. I would imagine it's close to 95. They have an immigrant population based on refugees from Africa and the Middle East. And they've got fascists or, blatantly racist leaders. And one party called the French Scripps Party, called the Progress Party, just elected an openly racist woman as their party leader last week. She was fired from the Ministry of Immigration about 2 years ago for something that she said racist, or some racist Facebook posts. But now she's back to leading the head of her party. And since Norway is based on many different parties forming a government, it's likely that she will probably get a position in the government within a year or two again. Yeah, but that's an observation that's quite clear that, and you can see it in Norway itself, like the places in Norway, the cities in Norway that have larger amounts of immigrant population, you get harsher police presence, you get, well, racism is everywhere in the country, but it's clear that somehow some systems, some social development and support systems, which Norway is like ridiculous about, they just don't seem to work just as well in those areas where there's a larger immigrant population. That's my observation. And so they want. One thing I noticed as well is that this DSM, he says that the DSM framework conceptualizes mental illnesses solely as brain disorders. And he says, mental illness, however, is not at all like cancer. Humans are social animals, and mental problems involve not being able to get along with other people, not fitting in, not belonging. Doesn't that sound like what victims of racism would feel like they're experiencing in any society in the world? That they're not being able to get along, not able to fit in because they're not white. So this DSM, once again, it fits with their pattern of focusing on things that appear logically and disregarding emotion and social. They call the social sciences the soft sciences, and the math, physics, science, engineering, the hard sciences. And they raise the hard sciences and slowly delegitimize the softer sciences. So the system itself is ill-equipped to properly support people. And then it's already got, when you have that it's designed for maintaining racism, white supremacy, it's even more out there. So one other thing I wanted to say, some observations though, is that even though you have, it's still about 95% white, and the jails in Norway, if you go to prison in Norway, sometimes you see a newspaper article with, like, for example, this guy who committed the mass killing in Norway, Breivik. in 2011. You see if a picture of his cell looks like a university dorm room. I kid you not. Window, desk, computer, books. I mean, it looks like a university dorm room. That's what the jail cell looks like. Yeah. Of course, if they say here that if Norway, I mean, if America was to put in $1 in prevention, they have $7 that they wouldn't have to spend for prison, the prison pipeline and so on. But if you think about it, I mean, oh yeah, that makes sense. And we hear people like Michelle Williams talking about that, the prison industrial complex. But if we think about it as a system of racism, white supremacy, where it's the function, it's supposed to produce functional inferiors in non-white people. And they're paying 7 times what they would have to if they would keep people functional. If they're only paying 7 times as much to keep people functional inferiors, that's a good bargain. I mean, if you did not have, if they paid the $1, the one, and they got everybody functioning properly, then it would be impossible to maintain the system of racism and white supremacy, not just in America, but in the world. If non-white people in the United States are no longer functional inferiors, it's going to be very difficult for America to maintain, to play the role that it plays in the system of perpetuating white supremacy around the world, because people will be looking at America and be like, wait a minute, non-white people there are thriving. It would be difficult, I would imagine. So paying 7 times as much to keep people as functional inferiors seems like a bargain for system of racism, because the cost of everybody of not having functional inferiors would, if white people feel that they are inadequate because of white skin and genetic recessiveness to non-white people, and they only have to just pay 7 times as much to keep them, to help create a situation where they can say, well, they're like animals and they're not, non-white people are not able to be a functional inferiors. 7 times as much seems to be a bargain. Plus, if you can get the non-white people to pay a lot of it through taxes and so on, that sounds like the system running like how it's supposed to run. And one thing I remember reading was, and I'll wrap up here, is that I remember reading that when the Irish first started to immigrate to America, they weren't considered white people, and there was like no dogs or no Irish in the pubs, and but after a while they decided that they would, after they had been there for a while and they had started to mistreat Black people and show that they could function as white people, they started to prepare social programs for these Irish families in New York, is what I remember reading about, where they would actively go to these families, just as is being described here, and help these families learn to raise their children and to have functional families. The government in New York actively came up with social programs and implemented them. And within like a generation or two, things were better. You weren't having the same kind of outcomes with crime and failed families that you see with non-white populations. So once again, the the author is showing pretty much a lot of the playbook of white system of racism, white supremacy. And I'll I pause here so that Regine King can speak.
Thank you, Silent Warrior. I also had a few notes I would like to share at this moment. Starting off with the first thing that stood out to me, which was the importance of quality of care. And when this moment came up, I kind of just thought about like the quality of care of like self and how we treat ourselves and how we kind of like cope with our traumas. And I think that's very important because sometimes the quality, when you think of quality of care, you think of like outsiders, like, oh, other providers or healthcare providers, you know, things like, oh, quality of care of someone else, but you don't think of how you personally are taking care of yourselves and if it's quality, if that's what you consider quality of care of yourself. And I think it's very important too, as we learned about what self-respect means, and it is an individual thing and how one treats themselves. So I think that kind of goes into the importance of quality care. And then also the next note I have is with the parent and child relationship and just the importance of this. And I heard a few others talk about this already, but I think it's very important as well for there to be some sort of, if there is an attempted parent who has a attempted or child, it's important that they have some sort of relationship if they care to. But I think it's important that they, if they're in the same house and they want to be so-called attempted parent and you have to like obey by their rules and all of these things, there has to be some sort of relationship there. And I think oftentimes it gets lost because there's this idea of like power, like, oh, because I'm the parent, you must obey me, or I'm the elder, you must obey me. But there's no like curate of like relationship building. There's just like this power dynamic of between parents and children, or adult figure and those who are considered child or sorry, kids or children. So I think it's one of those things that stood out too. And then also right here it says numbing leads to not reacting the way people are supposed to react. I found this to be really important because when you start numbing yourself over and over again, you kind of just like minimize the way you react to certain things. Like most people will be like, oh, this is just an example, like, oh, someone hit you. And you kind of just like, some people don't react at all because they kind of just like numb themselves so much that they don't respond the way someone is supposed to respond when trauma hits them or when they experience something that's like a little bit off. It's like, oh, well, I'm used to this feeling. I'm used to them treating me this way. So you don't respond the way a person normally would respond since you like minimize it all the time. And I found that to be interesting because even like myself over the course of just like ignoring some things or just like being the so-called bigger person or being the more understanding person or whatever it is in the situation, I kind of have to like almost like hype myself up to be that, like, I'm just being the bigger person. But in reality, it's just like, I don't react a certain way because I'm used to it, or I've learned to like block it out, block that feeling out. Like, oh, how do you, if someone asks me like, oh, how do you feel about this? And it's almost like I can't even identify how I feel about certain things. Like, it's just, I almost don't even know what to say because I pushed it so far down that it doesn't have a name for the feeling. There's no like, are you sad, mad? There's no like descriptive word for it. I just know there's a feeling there and I'm not sure like what it is. And then also we talked about like the body memory. So like some things might like trigger me and I wouldn't even like, I don't even register it because my body already knows like, oh, bad news, or ooh, it's happening again, or whatever it is. It's just like my body knows about it, but my brain is not connected. So it's like always like this disconnect. And then that also leads to like, again, me not reacting a certain way, or me like pushing it a certain way, pushing it down, or kind of just like blocking it out entirely. And then also that leads into like the body memory and the narrative memory of how like when people tell stories about their traumas, like how did they describe the situation? How did the situation happen, or what their feelings were? And like over the course of years, it almost becomes a different story, if not the same story, but more intense. But I think it just like, it kind of morphs into things as we learn things. And also we start to identify feelings, or we block it out entirely. So then the narrative of that memory is kind of just like, oh, well, this happened, no big deal, you know, or this happened and now this is why I'm this way. So it's kind of just like identifying the stories that we tell about our traumas. Like, how do you tell the story about the trauma that has happened? And then also this thing called psychoanalysis that they mentioned was very interesting, because I feel like the white supremacists, or even just like people, racist suspects, they got this down to a T, and they know exactly what can trigger someone and what can just like, oh, okay, they'll just gloss over this because they're too far gone, or they don't have a conscious feeling about this moment, so they can just gloss over this. And I think some of the things that I think about, like off the top of my head, is like this like enslavement of Africans. And I think that is like something that has traumatically happened to a large quantity of people, of African people, and also like how it's like a generational trauma too. And it almost like, when we talk about like slavery, we kind of just like, oh, well, it happened. We push it to the side. And it's like, even in our textbooks, and even when people talk about, well, it already happened, so you should be fine by now. Like, it's generational, generations, you know, have passed. So you don't really feel, you're not taught to feel a certain way because it already happened. So they have done like this psychoanalysis of you, of like what triggers you, or what triggers you and what doesn't trigger you, even through like social media. They know that if they post someone getting strangled to death, or they post someone who's just like fighting with the cops or whatever it is, you almost like have a different reaction to both. And they can like play on those and learn from how people in a group would react to certain things. So I think it's very important. That's what they usually do too. They use like evals, especially when you go to like therapy and stuff. They kind of just like, oh, let me just evaluate like what state of mind that you're in, and what triggers you and what doesn't, what's something that's conscious and unconscious about the things that you do. Because sometimes you can't even target or say like, I don't know why I do certain things or move certain ways, but your body does know. Thank you.
Very well said. Thank you, Ms. Nanaya. Social programs work. Thanks for mentioning that point. Silent Warrior. It's just that social programs work in a system of race and white supremacy. You cannot have thriving Black people or healthy Black people, which is why those social programs are definitely not targeted at non-white people, particularly Black people. And I think for the history lesson, I did not know that, well, I guess the text did tell us that they had constructive help programs like that. And people like to say that like the racist suspects are really like concerned about their monies. They'll do whatever makes them money. But having investing in social programs would save them a lot of money on welfare and other things. But white people aren't concerned about money. They're concerned about maintaining and refining the system of white supremacy, which is why even though it would be constructive and beneficial for millions of people, for them to create more social programs, or just even bring back the ones that they had in the past for families. But they're not in the business of creating healthy families. They're in the business of dominating non-white people and spending $84 billion a year on prison and the concept known as United States is an indication of racism and white supremacy. I guarantee where there are more dark people, non-white people, there will always be more prisons. And every white area of the world that has prisons, these prisons are always like vacation homes, like what Silent Warrior said, like dorms. But the prisons where the black non-whites are kept is always full of concrete, very, very small, because white people like the house. People like animals. This is one of the reasons and one of the ways that they like to practice racism, by confining large amounts of non-white people to prisons and cages and shackles and chains and stuff like that. Really traumatic, really incorrect. So sexually abused girls, victims of incest, they from my understanding, it's like they mature faster or they age faster, and they have high. I think it's a combination of both, because they have a huge cortisol and stress imbalance, and that study on them is like a great way to see how numbing just affects victims of like such trauma. And I suspect a large majority of non-white people are in a state of numbing or reacting to their numbing that has been so heavily traumatized and victimized into them. It took me a long time due to my chronic just my chronic trauma and all the stuff I've experienced. I also was a person who was quite numb, and I had to redevelop a lot of feelings that one would think are natural. And it's just so interesting how much time and care white people take to study themselves, and of course us, when they're looking for more refined ways to practice racism, white supremacy, or if they're actually trying to help members of the only race, the white race. Just really telling. And I really appreciated the Janae, like the person who coined disassociation, and the person who really started to put the stamp on traumatic memory, and how victims of trauma will like repeat the same mistakes over and over, whether consciously or subconsciously. This is just patterns that will occur in a person who has experienced a really severe traumatic event. And this was seen in Erin, the woman who I believe her mother died when she was young, and she tried to bring the mother back to life. She spent a while trying to bring the mom back to life, and then over the course of that experience, she needed a lot of constructive help, and Janae was able to help her through what was eventually called the talking cure. How just simply allowing a person to talk about their trauma and what they've been through, allow them to associate the appropriate feelings that should be associated with the event. How that is it's just so helpful for victims. And it's very, very telling that when the cure is talking about the problem, but white people will have us think that the cure is tons and tons of medications, and labeling children and non-white people as having behavioral issues, or having various disorders, whether it's attention deficit disorder or oppositional disorder. But that should be an indication of how this system is not designed to help anyone. It's designed to subjugate and control and dominate everyone, which is why even in the field of health, it's just so full of us being controlled. Like there's so little we can do. And trying to help ourselves, we must get our help from the people who practice racism and from the various institutions that exist in this system. And it is really, really tragic and really incorrect way to be existing on planet Earth. I think the case with the priest, Father Shantley, who molested the Julian for many years, and then Julian didn't even remember that he had been molested. It all came back through his traumatic memory. He would be like having sex with his girlfriend, and then he would get triggered, and then that is how traumatic memories, reminds me of what Nanaya said, it like lives in the body. Your mind may not, your mind remembers, but it like hides it. It like puts it away in the back of your mind, but then your body can experience certain things, and then you could immediately go back to that moment. And that's what happened with Julian. He didn't even know, he wasn't even thinking about how he was anally fingered and given oral sex by this sick priest. He was triggered, and then when it was in the news that the priest was being trialed, he remembered more, and he had to go through what he had to go through to get the constructive help he needed from that. But very telling of the system we live in, and very telling of how the mind and trauma works together to either just really interesting stuff. Is really sick, to say the least. Anyone wants to have any notes to share? If not, we can maybe get into closing comments.
Yeah, I wanted to say something about the pedophilia aspect of racism, white supremacy. I suspect that this priest has done this in other towns, and I suspect that he may even belong to a larger community of parishioners, or I think they call it parishioners, who do this thing on a regular basis. And I also suspect that one of the reasons why this Julian character went off into the military was probably because of the trauma that he suffered. I'm pretty sure a lot of his issues in life were because he was being sexually abused. I would even say raped, rape of the mind and of the body by this priest. And I do think rape is a major component of racism, white supremacy. I do think religion is, in a way, some type of spiritual rape, because it's like it provides this, it gives Black people and victims of racism, white supremacy, this imaginary character to fall upon to and to call upon to when things go awry. And just juxtaposing this priest raping this white male, it brought a lot into context, because I'm someone who's heavily interested in and overstanding the network of pedophilia. And whenever I'm investigating religious institutions such as the Pope, the Vatican, Catholic churches, Christian churches, Mormon churches, just about any church or religious institution, you can find instances of like child abuse, child pedophilia, and rape. And yeah, this type of thing can't exist without racism, white supremacy. And even white people, it seems, are victims of this, which is very interesting.
Yeah, agreed. And I think Julian expressed a very common symptom of people who are raped, by the system of white supremacy, or raped by racist suspects, or raped by victims. There's a common symptom that occurs when one experiences that sort of trauma, and that is you begin to hate yourself. You begin to hate yourself, hate your body, and hate the things associated with your body, whether it's people who look like you or your actual body. And due to the what the code calls mind rape, I believe just having that total reality that we are currently experiencing a mind rape, that is one of the many things that allows our many victims to enter a state where they start to hate themselves and other Black people, and like they will create songs that say I hate niggas and niggas ain't shit and all that nonsense. And this is because the mind rape that has happened to us. And yeah, really interesting. I see those who have their hands raised, like Kweku and then Silent Warrior.
Thank you. For my last comment, I just wanted to comment on the DSM-5 again. So something like that has become the standard for, I guess, diagnosing mental illness is very tragic, very deadly and lethal to non-white people. I mean, he mentioned that the entire book lacks validity, and it is no improvement on the diagnostic system. And just the fact that something like that exists is quite troubling, but it's to be expected under the system. I think that I'm sure there are things in the DSM-5 that can be somewhat beneficial, but I think it goes back to that phrase, or a reminder of solving problems without creating more. So the DSM-5 is basically just almost like a checklist or like a criteria that really avoids the issue of where are these problems stemming from, but right now, many non-white people, Black people, are subject to these diagnoses, and for they're what we're suffering from is injustice and mistreatment. And these are all just symptoms of it. But when you have something like this, you're just going to be treating the symptoms and not necessarily treating the issue. Once you eradicate the system of injustice and replace it with the system of justice, there would be no need for a DSM-5. And lastly, I just wanted to mention some solutions, because I was talking to my attempted parent yesterday, and she was talking a lot about religion and kind of what it's doing specifically in Ghana to people. And a lot of what I'm hearing, and a lot of what I'm hearing, and kind of like what this guy's also talking about is, a solution to me would be, practicing that self-respect that Dr. Frances Cress Welsing speaks about so much. I think that, if people are often trained, children often come into this world with a severe lack of self-respect, that they are taught not to respect themselves. So it leads you to things like religion, where you need that to kind of validate yourself, and how when you need something else to validate yourself or your existence, you can't say you respect yourself. You're practicing self-respect. You should be able to validate your own existence. If you're not able to do that, it allows other things to come into your life, other lies, other forms of mistreatment to come in and take over your existence, treat you, sorry, treat, and it allows you, to be subject to mistreatment. I think that if like parents, children are taught self-respect early on, just ways in order to respect themselves, we wouldn't be, as a group of people, subject to things like, the DSM-5. we have way too much self-respect for ourselves for somebody to tell us that, you know, we're suffering from mental illnesses and, you know, we don't know how these happened, or it's your fault that this happened. We have way too much self-respect. We know exactly what the cause of this is. The cause is the system of injustice and mistreatment in place. It is through no fault of our own that we are subject to that. I hope that was making sense. That's it for my comments. Thank you.
Tons of sense. Thank you. Very, very well said. Mr. Silent Warrior.
I need some more time to get my thoughts together.
I have something to say. When Julian was talking about his experience with the priest, and he kind of got scared because he saw his silhouette, so it made him like urinate on himself. That's a lot of trauma that a lot of young non-white males deal with, especially, you know, peeing on themselves or using the restroom on themselves. You know, as kids, you think that it's funny and, you know, you think it happens for like no apparent reason, but as you get older, it's a trauma that these young males go through, that they experience, and most times it's from somebody close to them. So I know a lot of young males that been through that goes through that, and it's just a sense of, instead of, you know, mimicking them or laughing at them for it, it's a trauma that they don't know how to deal best with within their self.
Thanks for reminding of that. Yeah, it's nice to pinpoint as that a symptom of trauma, that peeing on oneself out of fright or fear or for whatever reason. And also I'm sure there are millions of victims who experience the same reality of maybe someone's image popping up in their head as some sort of like flashback. As that is definitely a common symptom of trauma. Maybe someone did something to you, mistreated you in some way, and then you may experience a little jolt of anger or frustration at random moments, or when that person's mind image pops into your mind. That is definitely a symptom of trauma. For my closing comments, this is a really, really interesting segment. Yeah, this is just really so much evidence that racist suspects who are white people, they who can only be white people, so there's no confusion at all. Racist suspects do not care about helping people, do not care about solving any of the world's greatest problems. They don't care about providing people with adequate healthcare, because they're in the business of practicing racism and white supremacy. And in this system, you need non-white people to be in really, really destructive mind states, really, really unhealthy. And the best way to keep a person's body sick is to keep their mind confused and sick as well. And that's what they have done a awesome job at doing to victims of racism and white supremacy. We really have just the number, quite a number has been done on us, quite a number. And it's really tragic.
I would like to close off. One of the other last notes that I had written down was when they was talking about trauma and almost how like personality stops when people are going through trauma, and it's like their whole like persona changes. And it kind of just reminded me of myself, because I was thinking of like how we've been going through this, I don't want to call it a journey, but just evaluating our lives and thinking about the injustices and really understanding why they happen, and also why I kind of turned a blind eye for so long. I kind of just kept it minimal. And I think and also now as I was going through these things and thinking about all these traumas and things, it's almost like my personality changed, especially from like a year ago to now. Like people even tell me today, like, oh, you're so different, you know? And I roll up to meetings and I'm just like, my personality is just so different. But yeah, that's just something that I've been actually thinking about. And I talked about this yesterday, but trying to work on actually, just because I feel like I'm more just, I don't know how to say it. I'm just different, I guess, now than I was, I guess, last year, especially with my personality wise. And I kind of have been minimizing it just because I felt like there's a lot to deal with at the moment. And it's almost like overwhelming, but it's also something that's very important to deal with. And I think I need to take the time to take a moment to do it. So I'm hoping like after I go through my master's program, I'll have some time to kind of just sit there and evaluate and actually be able to cut off a lot of things and sit there and think about why I act a certain way, why are things the way they are, but along with keeping, I don't want to say hope, but some sort of hope. Because even thinking about racism and white supremacy kind of gets overwhelming, and just keeping hope and thinking about like, how do I live a life with like handling all of these traumas, but also living in the present day of war and thinking of how white supremacy and racism is like impacting my life and affecting people around me, and how do we react and how do we move forward and all these things. It's like we could sit here all day and I'm like, oh, okay, let's think of some strategies to strategies to end racism and white supremacy, but that doesn't minimize the fact that we still have to wake up every day feeling the same emotions as yesterday. So I think it's just like really being able to handle the load, but also continue the fight. Thank you.
Very well said. Thank you.
I'd like to go next.
Please do your last stop.
Okay. Near the end of the reading, Jeanne, when you're speaking about dissociation, you spoke about the capacity to assimilate new experiences. And I felt like that sounded like a reasonable start of a definition for maturity, and how there's value in Wilson talked about it's important to wait before you're having children, because once you have children, your emotional maturity slows down or stops, and because you're caring for another person and you're helping them with their own emotional maturity. And but I just felt that that's something I feel like this book club is doing. It's helping us to assimilate new experiences as we come across this new information, new meaning to things that have happened in our life. It is helping to increase our maturity. Someone talked about how sexual assault is a core part of is one of the acts of violence that white supremacy perpetuates on victims. And I can see clearly how when violence happens to your body, that affects your mind. Violence happens to your body, your brain responds, affects your mind, affects your personality. And it's impossible to separate the mind from the body, the mind from the brain and the body. So it's quite clear why when physical traumas happen and so on, or when mental traumas happen, how it can show up on the body and vice versa. So I think that's really interesting and exciting because it is a way of showing how we can also heal, because white supremacy, system of racism, white supremacy was not in place forever. And I mean, it's not the reason that we have these brain structures and have these reactions to trauma. These general neurological pathways and responses to trauma are, I mean, they were not formed over evolution through, because we've had white supremacy for 20, 30, 40,000 years. No, humans have developed these responses to threat and danger. And for thousands of years, tens of thousands of years. And my point is that white supremacy is relatively new, but the ways that our bodies and our minds react to trauma is relatively much, much older than white supremacy. And the ways that our bodies and minds heal from trauma, the mechanisms, is also much, much, much older than the system of racism, white supremacy. So there's hope. And although we'll find some techniques and insights in this book, I think we can also connect with our ancestors, the practices of our ancestors, to find the ways that we've been solving and healing from racism. I mean, healing from any kinds of trauma or difficult experiences, starvation, war, famine, natural disasters. All of those things would have created trauma in our ancestors' bodies thousands and tens of thousands of years ago. So this is a solvable problem. And it's a solvable, healing trauma in general is a solvable problem. And playing our side of the chessboard, countering the system of racism, white supremacy, is also a solvable problem. So I personally have been having a tough time the past couple of weeks, but I decided to join today to keep the habit and to read and to be with you to help solve problems. So thanks for letting me be a part of this. Thanks for keeping the group going. Okay, that's it from me. 05. Nana, Caris, Kweku, and Cert. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank everyone for
I don't think I went for the closing comments.
Go ahead, Mr. Sir.
My closing comments, keep it brief. So from this book, I'm learning what trauma does, which is just like racism, white supremacy. It makes us victims, unable, I don't want to use the word progress, but unable to move forward constructively, unable to talk about producing justice, unable to see the dire necessity for justice to be produced, and how white supremacy has a bucket of tools, an arsenal of tools. We've learned in this chapter that rape, sexual abuse, and sexual trauma is one of them. And that morphs into what they call trauma. These acts and these behavior patterns create the trauma that morphs a person's brains and fragments their memory. Very tragic. Looking forward to the next chapter and pages of this book.
Yep. racism, white supremacy, and trauma, just same thing to victims. Retards us, makes us unable to see the world as it is, but most importantly, unable to have the will and ability to produce justice. Thanks for the wonderful insight and notes everyone has shared. I'll see everyone either Wednesday or next week.